Who'd you talk to? What's going on? It is me, Mike Lepre, King Michael. This is Legit Paranormal, brought to you by LegitPodcast.com. It is 7:07. We are, that's how that goes. Sometimes you're late, sometimes you're not late. The date is 05152022. It's got to be something in there for the math geeks. Has to be 05152022. Got to be something. Joining me as always, Joey Paranormal. What's up, Joe?
A lot better after finishing my military obligations for the weekend and watching the Celtics destroy the Bucks. Oh, what a game.
Crazy, right?
Oh, Grant Williams. That's what they needed to. They needed somebody else to step up outside of Brown and outside of Tatum. And it's just been nice. It's been someone different every night.
So, Joe, this is Legit Paranormal, brought to you by LegitPodcast.com. Usually joining us around this second would be Buddy there. But, see, now Buddy's not scared of ghosts, but Buddy is scared of technology.
Yes.
So that's not an easy thing for Buddy to do. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Buddy is,
Buddy this is why I'm even here in the first place.
Yeah.
If Buddy wasn't afraid of technology, I would have never been on the show.
That's true. That is true.
I gave him a new laptop and everything. I wonder what the hell's the issue now? Unless maybe he's trying to use the new laptop for the first time and it's just like blowing up.
All right. I got to bring in, I guess. David, can you hear us?
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
I'm gonna give I want to give the last name a shot. It's David Matthew Procaccini.
Yes.
Procaccini.
Hold on, I gotta turn my volume up. All right, go again. Sorry.
So Procaccini.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm Italian.
Starting early, aren't you?
Well, because dude, it's gonna start early and often. I mean, he grew up in Johnston. So, Dave, usually, but what we have is Buddy there. Will do his beer of the week, and then he'll do the introductions. But I think Joey messed them up by giving him some new technology, and now Buddy can't seem to find his way back on board. So I'm gonna run down what Buddy has told me about you. Now, all right, so the thing is, the problem with me is the things that are going to stick out are going to be like so, hopefully, somewhat in order, but I'll give it a shot. All right. So I grew up in Johnston, right?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Bishop Hill.
Okay. So I grew up in North Providence. So, the whole. It's all kind of the same in the middle, but
Sure.
But all right. So now the reenactment things, I gotta stop. Because I gotta Colonel. Like, what does it take to get to? And I'm being serious. What would it take to get to play the Colonel?
Okay, so first of all, I'm the Colonel of the Kingston Reds, and we're actually not reenactors.
All right.
We're members, we're an independent chartered company of the Rhode Island Historic Militia. So our organization was chartered in October of 1775, and we serve under the governor and under the direct command of the Adjutant General of the National Guard. And so I think there are 13 current state militia companies, like the Varnum Continentals that meet at the Varnum Armory, and the Kentish Guards, the Patuxent Rangers, Artillery Company of Newport. And so we are technically a state military organization. Some members in our organization reenact for educational programs, and some of them reenact as a hobby. But technically, we're a state militia. And if we're called out by the governor of the Adjutant General, we have to go. And so our organization is run like a military organization, and Officers are elected by the company. And so I was elected the commander of the company last May, and the commander of the company holds the rank of colonel in the
Huh?
state militia, which is the highest rank you can carry in the Rhode Island State Militia.
Congratulations.
Thank
Fantastic.
you.
So, all right, to break it
Excuse
down,
me.
I don't mean to say it like this. So you kind of remind me of Buddy in the sense that you're a big time history guy,
Yeah.
right? That seems what drew you into the whole world of whatever we're in. And then obviously you bumped into the paranormal just from the years and years of dealing with historical locations, historical places.
The house I grew up in.
Oh, all right
Yeah.
then. Jesus,
Yeah.
Christopher. So you grew up in a house that you had.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I grew up in a house that was built in 1790, and in the 1800s, the property was a tuberculosis sanitarium.
Oh, come on.
And we had at least 2 suicides in the house as well in the early 20th century. A mother and a daughter both killed themselves in that house. Actually, the mother killed herself in the house, and the daughter killed herself in the barn. The barn. Hold on 1 second. I'll be right back.
You know,
My cat's doing something that shouldn't be. So hold on.
that's
Sorry.
all right. I got dogs. You know, though, Joe, if you're gonna kill yourself, you might as well take it to the barn.
Right. It's neater.
It's proper. That's the best way to go out.
So my dad grew up in that house too, and when he was a kid, all kinds of stuff went on. As a matter of fact, our next door neighbor, who's now my dad's brother-in-law, was in the house in 1967, and in the very 1950s kitchen looks onto the very colonial dining room with the fireplace.
Wow.
And a disembodied head of a woman was floating through the house at him, and he did not. And he lived next door. He did not return to the house until 1997, 30 years later. He would not step foot in that house.
Wow.
And I used to wake up when I was a kid with the, excuse me, the same woman standing at the foot of my bed. And, other stuff went on like that in the house.
What did she want? Who was she? What did she want?
We don't know. She could have been a patient, or she could have been the woman that committed suicide. Every time she was present, there was a strong smell of perfume in the house. Really like cheap, nasty perfume.
Avon.
But did you ever ask? Did you ever say, why are you saying, why are you watching me sleep? What's the deal?
No, I would put the blanket over my head and go back to sleep like she wasn't there. We would have, when I was in my 20s, our living room had an addition with a big sliding glass door, and the colonial dining room was behind it. And I had friends over one night, and she went through the dining room, and her reflection went across the sliding glass door. Like the TV was next to the sliding glass door, and so we saw her reflection to the right. And so I saw it, and everybody kept watching TV. And about 20 minutes later, one after another, like, did you see the reflection of like a lady walk through the dining room like a half an hour ago? That stuff happened all the time. And we wake up in the middle of the night with the sound of shattering glass in the house and never found any.
Okay. So I got to call timeout on that, Dave, because I have a problem, Dave. So I could not live in a house where I knew there was a floating head of a woman.
Yeah.
No, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I would try to catch it with a pillowcase and throw it out. I would try to like ask her what her issue was. Like, I'm so I don't know how you guys have patience like that. The ability to like
nothing was ever moved. Nobody was ever touched. Nothing. Just the apparition and the noise of breaking glass. Our whole house, and it was always around Christmas. We woke up. The entire household woke up. It sounded like a huge mirror shattered on the second floor of the house. And nothing. There was nothing. I mean, it woke our entire house up. And then another year around Christmas, something else like that happened. And then my stepmother was sick in the house. She had muscular dystrophy and was it was bedridden and not doing well. And pretty much all of the activity ceased around that time in the house, or at least I wasn't paying attention to it anymore then. And I don't know. My dad still lives in the house, and he really doesn't say much about it these days.
Dave, before I bring Buddy in, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, sure.
But I can see Buddy's twiddling his thumbs. Before I bring him in, I guess I have this question too. If you found the spider in your house, what do you usually do when you see it?
In my house, I usually leave it alone. My wife would probably kill it. She's afraid of him. I usually leave him alone.
So see, therein lies, Joe, what I've been trying to say about the whole paranormal thing of it. Like, when I see a spider, my dad taught me to kill it as fast as you can, get it out of the house, and move on. So I have a hard time. I always had a hard time with the paranormal stuff because I'm always like, I don't have the patience everyone else does. But speaking of patience, oh my God, here he is, buddy. There, everybody.
Good evening, gentlemen. I hate technology, Joe. While the computer works great, it doesn't have a camera like this one has. So I had to try to set that up, and that wasn't working. So I went back to this one.
Oh, buddy, I think that's because there's a piece of electrical tape over the camera.
I'm gonna tell you right now.
That's good to know now.
I forgot about that. I think there's a piece of electrical tape over the camera.
I'll have to look. It's a lovely computer though. So Buddy's not exactly technologically savvy, and that's why Ocean State Paranormal has a tech guy. Which is
welcome to Buddy.
Yeah,
thank
I put
you,
a piece of electrical tape over it.
I hate to interrupt, but I'm going to interrupt with one of Rhode Island's favorite sons, David Procaccini. We have one of Rhode Island's favorite daughters. This is my beer of the week, Captain's daughter. Go on, guys. This is a wonderful interview so far.
Thank you, buddy. You dropped the IQ of the room by about 40 points just then.
I try, Mike. Thank you.
You came in wheeling and dealing with all kinds of TDs, technical difficulties. So, all right. I was just talking about my issue with so he grew up in a house that was haunted, and there's been horrific things connected to the house. So let's move on. So Dave, the idea of history. Which one did you get into first? Because it seems like paranormal was just kind of dropped on you. Doesn't seem like you.
Yeah, I was never really into paranormal. I was a history junkie from when I was a kid. Whatever. World War II was probably my first thing, and then Civil War, and now I was thrown into the Nathaniel Green Homestead 11 years ago. So now I do a lot of colonial stuff, but World War II and Civil War are my things, and Rhode Island genealogy and Rhode Island history too. Those are my big things. I mean, Buddy sees my stuff probably all over social media.
Now, just so I can help explain this for Joey, what does genealogy mean?
So I study my ancestors. So my non-Italian side of the family have been here since the 1600s. My mother's side of the family go back to the Pilgrims and the founders of Providence and Greens. I'm related to Nathaniel Green,
wow.
and quite a few other prominent Rhode Island families that had a lot of money that I wish I had now.
and the Italian side came between 1910 and about 1920, right?
1912. The Italian side came here. I have all my grandfather and my grandmother's naturalization records. They came from the town of Pani in Foggia. There's the Young Panese Society in Silver Lake.
Italian.
And that's so. Yep. Antonio Procaccini was the founder of the Young Panese. It's the Panese Society.
I was saying that my ancestors all came from 1910 to 1920, both sides of the family. Parents, that's around the time that all the Italians came on over. That was the decade.
Yeah, we did our DNA testing, and we're come from everywhere.
Yeah. I was never ever gonna. I'm not the whole thing about swabbing your mouth and sending it out to people. I mean, even now they make you do it for different reasons, but back then it just creeped me out. Like giving someone my DNA was just kind of weird. Felt violated. Kept waiting for my duplicate.
My sister and my mother did. I didn't.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. Now they did it, so it's out there.
Yeah.
It makes for a good joke because my fiance did the same thing and she didn't mail her saliva for about 2 to 3 days after she did it, and it made for a running joke. I'd be like, "Can you get your spit off the table, please, and do something with it?" And that's my 2 cents. I'll go back in the corner now.
The weirdest thing about the genealogy thing with ancestry is I actually have good friends of mine, and they're half Greek, and their kids are half Greek and half Irish. So the father's 100% Greek and the mother's 100% Irish. They actually go to school, Mike, with your
buddy,
graduating class with your children this year.
Buddy, does that mean that guy can drink a beer while making 8 hot dogs up his arm?
He's only 18, Mike, so I don't want to push it on him yet. But who might give alcohol to children? But anyway,
the sweaty arm.
Yeah. See, Dave gets the whole going into a Greek systems back in the day.
Sweaty arm.
Eh,
with the gaggers. Yeah.
It
what
adds
do you
to
want,
the
onions?
flavor.
I'm like, you're giving it enough onions. You're giving it enough onions already, my friend. But yeah, I missed that. I missed that a lot. All right. So in general, are you a big historian as far as and buddy, you did no introduction, so I'm just asking Dave questions, which I kind of
Yeah,
like.
he's a historian. He's a
But even in Rhode Island, as far as Rhode Island's history, like Rhode Island itself,
Yeah.
solely, right? What about Federal Hill then?
I have some stuff on Federal Hill. You know, where I work, I get a lot of. I work for the Department of Transportation. I manage all the historic records there, and I get a lot of record requests for the stuff that's not on Federal Hill anymore. So,
Yeah.
like, if you're coming up Route 10 from Cranston, that area, and I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember, but if you came on Route 6 from Johnston heading towards Providence, the Atlantic Coal towers used to be there on the corner, and now it's like there's like all school buses parked there.
Yep.
Well, that whole area where Route 10 is, that was all rail yards. There was a huge roundhouse there. There were all train sheds. That whole area, and the path of Route 10 that cuts through Federal Hill, that was all a rail line at that time, and that pretty much cut that neighborhood off. And so I get a lot of requests for people that are looking for pictures of their grandparents' houses, because we have those. We have all the stuff of all the houses and the buildings that were taken when they built that highway. So that's what I'm knowledgeable on Federal Hill, is that kind of stuff. Like, you know, like a guy, you might know him, buddy, you know, like Larry DiPetrillo, that does stuff. So Larry sent me a request for pictures. Or there's a singer, Ron Giorgio, that's all over Facebook. I don't know if you've seen him.
I grew, oh, come on. I grew up at Ronnie Giorgio.
So I found Ron's grandparents' house. Pictures of it because it's gone. Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff I do with Federal Hill. So I find
So wait. This has become like now this is strange. So now, so Ronnie. So let me explain Ronnie Giorgio. Ronnie Giorgio is a guy I grew up with in high school. Played against him in basketball ferociously, beat him. Then we both had kids go through the basketball system. Our sons played each other in the championship game, beat him. I hope Ronnie's listening. But he's a great guy. So and I remember, how long ago was this? Because I remember him saying something along these lines of like, it was there, but it wasn't there.
Maybe 2 years ago. Maybe 3. The last 2 years feel like a month. So maybe 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing with Federal Hill that I was always enchanted with, well, not enchanted with, but I always wanted to hear stories about, was how originally there was a strict line where it was Irish on this side of the street and Italian on this side of the street. And my dad would tell the stories of like running across the street as a kid and having like an older woman throwing a rock at him. Like, that seems so wild and bizarre. It almost sounds like like back in the Westerns, you know, in cowboy days.
Yeah.
That sounds crazy, but that's how that was. So, all right.
So my historic thing is finding stuff that nobody else can find. That's what I'm good at.
There it is. All right.
I'm good at finding stuff, and I'm good at figuring out where to find stuff where it's not supposed to be. That's what I do that all day with my job.
Let me ask you a question then, Dave, really quick. I have as Ocean State Paranormal, I have a case I'm working on in Warwick, and
Yep.
Right. And there's the history of the building goes back to 1932, but the history on paper doesn't start as a business as what it was until 1938. So there's 6 years of missing history. There is suggestions that it was. Now I know it was owned by this guy, by Patrick H. Quinn. Now that name might ring a bell as a Rhode Islander. He owns Patrick H. Quinn Funeral Home. It's in Warwick.
Yep.
Dates back to like late 19th century Providence, and then he moved his business to Warwick in like the 1950s. But this is like, he owned this building in 1932 to 1938. There's rumor that this building was used as like a crematorium, maybe like a spot for him to put his bodies. There's even like myth, I guess you could say, of like bodies being buried in the basement. So
Allegedly.
Allegedly. And so it's tough to find any facts like this, but some of these rumors come from City Hall itself. employees at City Hall. So, any like what direction I should go as far as
So, whereabouts in Warwick is it?
it's on West Shore Road.
And I'm sure you already looked at the deed records for it, right?
Yeah, the records go back to an Italian couple in 1930 bought it from Patrick H. Quinn, and then it became a gas station and a bakery and a convenience store and all sorts of different businesses throughout the years. Now it's a restaurant.
The city directories that go back to that time period are a good resource for that. Because if
I have checked, and
okay.
Unfortunately, Warwick Library has the record, and they go as far back as I think 1942.
State Archives have them.
Okay, I'll have to.
Ken Carlson has all of them.
All right, I know
so
Ken.
That's why I would go with that. I think I helped you looking at some property right across the river in Quidnick last year, West Warwick.
Yep.
You were looking. I found some stuff on that for you.
Yep.
I find that the Sanborn maps are a good resource now. For finding
the
stuff,
insurance maps,
but the ones that the Library of Congress has are not complete, and some of them are mislabeled by year. I have access through the University of New Hampshire through my job to the complete Sanborn maps, and there are gaps in the ones at the Library of Congress, and there are errors in them.
I've also found that, like the Department of Planning, I think the Department of Planning, they have their archives department has aerial photos of some areas of Rhode Island that you wouldn't know that existed, that were probably taken in a biplane.
You can get them on DEM's website too. If you Google Rhode Island DEM historic aerials, it'll give you the layers. The only problem that I have with it has the current roads overlaid over all of them. So it obscures some of the details in it, but those go back to 1936, I think. I think that's as far back as they go. What's that?
I'm trying to think in my head of the amount of time that you spent with all of this and the work that you've put in with it. And as I was thinking that and listening to you, my head started to actually swell up and hurt, I think, for a second. No, I'm being serious. I'm like, that's so, you're like one of those Google guys for certain things. Like in other words, if you want to talk about the New York Football Giants, I'm your Google guy. Just ask me a question. I'll tell you about the team, goddammit. But sorry, got out of control. What I'm saying is, so you're the Google guy as far as just how things used to look, or where things used to be, or how to find things. That's the biggest thing. You're a diver of Rhode Island, history. You need to find that. Let me figure this out.
I am, and I have a serious problem with facts. In Rhode Island, we perpetuate myths as history quite a bit. And the biggest one I have, especially this time of year, and Buddy's probably seen it, is the Gatsby Day issue. Of course. And I have a serious issue. It's the first blow of the American Revolution, and it's not.
Explain.
We have two events that predate that. We have the HMS Liberty was burned and sunk in Newport Harbor by angry Newport residents because they were harassing Connecticut merchants in 1768. And in 1764, in protest of the Sugar Act, the Artillery Company of Newport seized Goat Island and took their cannons there and opened fire on an HMS St. John, and HMS Squirrel opened fire back at them 8 years before Gatsby. I get in trouble all the time because I correct them. The Secretary of State right now is perpetuating the myth. They sent out all this stuff for the 250th anniversary of the Gatsby, and they're calling it the first act, and they're ignoring the two previous acts in Newport.
It was a Rhode Island thing, though. It's nice to be able to say it didn't. The revolution didn't start in Lexington. It started here in Rhode Island, but
it is. But it needs to be right too.
Joe,
I lost.
Joe,
we lost Mike.
No,
Mike,
Joe, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good now.
Can you hear me, Joe?
Yeah, that's what you get for making fun of Buddy.
No, I'm saying, did you know this? Did you know any of this?
I was aware. So I'd heard. I was aware that the Gatsby wasn't the true Kickstarter that Rhode Island perpetuates, but I didn't know of what events took place beforehand, or at least if I did, I didn't remember. But I had heard, I had heard it before. I didn't know fact.
So Joe, better notes then is what I'm saying. Better notes. Dave,
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
It's
Those
like
are
the
some really
people
good
that
notes.
share a meme on social media to support their political cause, but they put stuff that's nonsense in it, so it makes them look like a moron supporting their political cause because they're sharing stuff that's not true. It's kind of like that to me.
All right, but here's where I stand with that. And I got this is where I get crazy because you know what it is? It's not that. It's that they're trying to appeal to what they think are morons. So they're trying to make it as simple and as like wrapped tight as they can, and they're not going to deviate from what's been working. And God forbid they rewrite history. Blah 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 blah. It's all bullshit, in my opinion. You ain't gonna get through it because you're dealing with a bunch of
they spotlight Gatsby event with Gatsby Days and the parade and all the
It's
hubbub
great.
around in the event. And I think
I'll never forget the Rhode Island Mall had actually it was the first time I'd ever even seen anything on the Gatsby. The Rhode Island Mall back when I was way younger than I am now had a really beautiful mural on the walls of one of the entrances documenting and telling the tale of the burning of the Gatsby.
Was the Rhode Island Mall open during the Gatsby? Was that when they had people going there?
Actually, you know what? You're probably not completely off.
Is that the last time someone went to the Rhode Island Mall? All right, so 2 events happened before the Gatsby, but they still celebrated anyways. You have the proof of it, but they pretty much won't give you a voice at all.
Well, I mean, a lot of people know. It's just I have a problem. I'm not a big social media guy. Like, I'm not a big social media warrior. I tend to not interact with people with nonsense. But every time, if I'm on a page that supposedly has halfway decent history, I mean, nobody has great history, but they try to have halfway decent history, and they share that. And especially this time of year, from now until June, it's big all over it. Gatsby. And people get angry with me that I point out the 2 older ones. Like, somehow, I'm a jerk for pointing out the truth. It's interesting.
Facts. So again, with you, it's strictly facts, ma'am. But the point is, you're like dealing with the blowback of trying to give somebody just facts because
it's like the Sheldon Cooper of history.
It used to work like that though back in the day. You could give somebody facts and they would like listen to you. And that would be the end of the conversation. But now you can give them facts, and if it's not the facts they wanted to hear, they're not facts.
It's fake news.
Yep.
Yeah, they'll just move on. They move on, which is a horrible thing. Now, Dave, question that I always have is:
Sure.
Have you ever found articles of clothing, Civil War type clothing, stuff like that, even like certain spots like that you've gotten weird like vibes? We'll call them vibes.
Absolutely. And Buddy's probably experienced them in the same place. I mean, that brings us to the Green Homestead. Yeah, so definitely. That place, there's all kinds of stuff in there that has weird vibes. And we'll start with the biggest weird vibe, and that's our doll, Helen. You know Helen, Buddy? The creepy doll up on the 2nd floor?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So Helen came. So upstairs in our house, in what we call Elizabeth Margaret's bedroom, is furnished with stuff that came out of the Barton house that used to be in Warwick that was torn down. We had a chance to buy the Barton house and move it to the homestead, but our board of directors in the 80s didn't know how to do that. So eventually that house was torn down. It was off of 117. It was over in East Greenwich, kind of where 95 on the Warwick East Greenwich line over in that area. And so we have all the furnishings that. What's that, Buddy?
Good area. Me and Joe investigated a place right over in that neighborhood. Fantastic.
I was just wondering. I wonder how far from where we were that was. I could deviate,
right
but that area
right on Division.
Yeah, it was like Division Route 295 area right over there.
Huh, interesting.
And they had a big farm there, the Bartons.
That might explain a lot. Sorry.
Yeah. So we have the furnishings in that bedroom, Elizabeth Margaret's bedroom, and also we think Elizabeth Margaret is still in that bedroom. So first we have Helen, who's one of those bisque head, the bisque dolls, the porcelain doll, and she's in a stroller, a pram, in the corner, and the floor in that room is relatively straight, and every now and then the pram makes its way across the room until it hits the door jamb in the doorway. So you come up the stairs and round the corner, and Helen is right there in the pram. She's gone 20 feet across the room in there. Also, there we have rope stanchions. You know, like remember when we were kids, the line at the bank had the rope stanchion with like the velvet rope.
Like the
So
movie bed of
we
ropes.
have that, but with regular ropes across the entrance. And I've been in the house when we've set up the rope stanchion in that room, and then come back an hour later, and all 3 rope stanchions are in the middle of the room together like this. All 3 of them.
So, question, Dave. Got a doll in your house that's
It's
haunted.
mobile.
That might be maybe evil. I don't know.
Nah, she just moves around.
All right, but she is doing stuff in the house.
Yeah,
creepy looking, right?
Creepy Helen. Yeah. She's creepy.
So,
well, all those dolls are creepy anyway.
So I would garbage bag it as fast as I could, and boom, gone. I would drive.
She's like the spider for us. She's like the spider. We just put her back. You know.
I don't get it. Buddy, help me out, man.
Yeah.
What is it with the whole paranormal? This whole paranormal thing that if sometimes you let like an evil doll stay with you. Like the other guy that went to pick up an evil doll late at night.
I guess you have to say allegedly because it's not evil.
As anybody knows that knows me, I hate dolls. All dolls, whether they be haunted or allegedly haunted or not even haunted at all, just like a prop in my mother's living room. I absolutely hate them. I find them to be
buddy.
So,
let go of 3rd grade. Go ahead, Dave. I'm
sorry.
Nothing
to do with 3rd grade.
I have a theory.
I still think dolls are creepy.
I have a theory on Helen.
Go
ahead. You know, we don't advertise this, and so it's not out there very much. So tonight, there were two young girls that died in that house, 7, 8 years old. Oof. And we don't advertise, like it's not known. Buddy knows about it, but I mean it's not out there publicly generally.
Yeah.
And so in 2012, right when I took over at the homestead, when actually Buddy volunteered there, I think that year or the year after, the lower field below the homestead was completely overgrown, and the cemetery is in the back corner. And to get to the cemetery, the trees were all overgrown. It was like walking through a tunnel. Now it's a big, wide open field. So I had a lady show up from one of the, like the magazines used to get like at the grocery store, like Rhode Island, whatever. They would have a couple of articles for tourism and then like ads for like restaurants and stuff.
Yeah.
So she shows up and she's supposed to interview me, and she's very pregnant. She's like 10 weeks pregnant. And she says to me, I'm the pet column writer, and I don't know anything about this place. So treat me like I don't know anything. I said, all right. So we do the whole tour, and we're walking down to the cemetery, and she says to me, hey, I don't want to freak you out. I said, oh, here we go. I said, all right. She said, look, when I was a kid, we had a house that was haunted, and I could talk to them. Nobody could see him, and I could see him. And then when I became an adult, I couldn't do it anymore. And now that I'm pregnant with a baby, I have that back. And there were 2 little girls that are at this house, and they're causing trouble. They're pranksters because they're kids. Wow. And they're moving that pram on you, right? I said, okay, yeah, that's possible. And she goes, look, I don't know anything about this place. So fast forward a couple of years later, and we had 2 older adults that volunteered there, and their grandkids would come with them, and their 7-year-old granddaughter would come and dress up in colonial clothes, and she would play in the yard. And at that by then we'd cleared that whole field, so there was no woods, and so they could see from the house right down to the cemetery. And so one day she was there, and she didn't like being there with them because there were no kids to play with. And she went home, and she was kind of dejected and miserable. And her grandmother asked her, hey, what's going on? Oh, nothing. Well, you seem miserable. Well, again, she was dressed in colonial clothes. She said, there were 2 little girls my age playing down by the cemetery with a ball all afternoon, dressed like me, and they wouldn't play with me or talk to me. So, we didn't share that information. Like my 9-year-old comes to the homestead and we have paranormal investigations, and she's like, yeah, all right, whatever. But this girl, we didn't tell her any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we had that, and there have been other people that have mentioned little girls there on the property, and the other thing is they've seen a cat on the property quite a bit in the house.
So how do all right, because this goes back to I almost call it the brother split, because we go back to a child ghost apparition voice. There's some camps that believe that's an evil spirit pretending to be a child. And then there's some camps believe that they're children. My problem always is when there's children, if they're children spirits, wouldn't it be better to help them pass on?
Well, we've had people try to talk to them and stuff and really had no response. We don't get any. I mean, Buddy's been in the house. You get a vibe like there's someone in the house with you, but you never get an evil vibe in the house.
Never.
It doesn't have that at all, ever. I mean, you get the feeling like when you're up in the second floor and there's somebody up there with you, and somebody's up there with you, and you're the only one in the house. I mean, like really, like somebody's up, and I've been in the house where somebody said my name in the house. I met at a meeting with a woman that said it was a woman's voice saying my name, and I talked back to her and she didn't answer. And I went to the window and she was sitting in her car on her phone. Like somebody said, "Hi, David, how are you?" Like crystal clear. And I thought it was her and talked back to her, and it wasn't like something I imagined. I mean, it was in the house. And then, we've been in the house where you're on the first floor and you can hear somebody walking back and forth on the second floor. But it's never evil or there's no anger there. They're just, well, this one, Elizabeth Margaret gets aggravated. She was
there's always one
in the temperance movement. She was the last green to live in the house. She died in 1898. And she was heavily involved in the temperance movement, which was the anti-alcohol movement after the Civil War. People don't realize the origins of the temperance movement were all these wives whose husbands came back from the Civil War with PTSD and were abusing morphine and opium and alcohol. And so that's why they were in the temperance movement. So the very first time I was in the house was on the 4th of July, probably, oh God, in the early 2000s with the caretaker there, Greg Merker. He's now the guy that runs Sprague Mansion.
I know Greg Merker, yeah.
And we went, we lost Mike.
Nope.
And we lost Mike. She's going to miss the end of the story.
Mike and technology, look at that, man.
No, I dog issue.
Century. So anyway, I went in the house and we had a beer in the dining room in the homestead, which I would never let anybody do. And so we had a beer, and then we had a second beer, and then all the doors on the second floor have thumb latches, and every single thumb latch in the whole house started shaking like a freight train was going by the house. And then you heard somebody stomping their feet on the second floor.
That's incredible. Dave, as a paranormal investigator there, I have a few stories, but none is like eerie. I mean, that's pretty eerie, but none is eerie as like being in that house, giving a tour, walking through the house with people, not a problem. Walking people out, talking to them out. They get in their car. You go in there, you're locking everything up, and you're on the first floor. You can hear the second floor. You hear those latches. You're the only one in that house. And you hear those latches clicking. That is so eerie and so like, you're looking at the stairs and the landing. It's like, I'm not gonna go up there. I'm just gonna lock up and I'm gonna set the alarm and get out of here. I'm all set. But that's.
I heard the ending of the story. I was wrestling a 120-pound dog.
Did you miss the story? Did you hear it?
No, I heard it. I heard the second beer. I was hoping you were gonna go on the third beer, and then the fourth beer, and then
5 beers.
See how long you keep Buddy sitting there.
6 beers.
Well, 19 beers.
So there's that kind of stuff that goes on in there. We had a guy that used to come with his horse all the time, and so have you guys familiar with the house? So you've seen the picture of the house. Yeah, Buddy's familiar, but so all of a sudden I can't hear anybody say. Buddy, say something.
Something.
There you go. All right, you were gone for a minute. So if you're in the front of the house, which is the part of the house that faces away from the current street, in the bottom left-hand corner at like 10 o'clock, there's a corner in the wall, and the driveway used to come through. And in that corner, people have heard a small child crying, going back to the early 20th century, and also a horse-drawn carriage coming through in the middle of the night. It woke up caretakers there, and the small child was noted by multiple caretakers on the property. So we had this guy, Dave Loader, that was a reenactor that portrayed Nathaniel Green, and his horse was pretty tolerant. They would fire muskets around, they'd fire cannons. That horse was not fazed at all.
Didn't move at all. I know what you're talking about.
Refused to go in that corner of the yard. If you went there, he would start to buck and rear. And when he was in the yard near there, no matter where he was, he would turn. So he was facing that corner, that it was not behind him. Always. And so they heard the small child crying there. Now, we don't have a lot of history of the house. It's actually really oddly missing. The history of the house is missing from like 1781 to like 1911. The entire 19th century, all that history is gone. Nobody knows where it went. Nobody knows what's going to. Excuse me, I'm going to blow my nose. I apologize.
Go ahead.
Like a foghorn.
Somebody clip that.
So,
Dave, talking about like dark history at the Green Homestead. When I first went there and I got the tour from the curator, he walked me through the house and everything, and then we went out to the grounds and we walked out to the cemetery. He told me a story about in the 1980s there was a kid that was probably homosexual and he was taken out there and murdered by classmates. Is there any truth?
So here's the actual story. So the kid, and I know somebody that has firsthand knowledge that was present during that. And so that was bikers, and the bikers lured him out. I don't know what I've never asked what the reasoning was, but it was so the cemetery was in the woods then. Now if you're at the house you can see the cemetery, it's all clear, but then it was in the woods, and it was about 300 feet from what's now the Coventry bike path, which at that time was the defunct rail line for the Providence, Albany, and Hartford Albany Railroad. And so people would walk up and down that, and then there was a trail that came off of the bike path through the back of the homestead property that nobody really monitored. It was all overgrown. And so they came in off the bike path. They would take their motorcycles off the bike path and hang out in there. It was like their hangout for their motorcycle club. And they actually stomped the guy to death. And then the caretaker, it was Celia Boggs was the caretaker, and she went down and found the body, I think, the next day. And it was interesting because they generally didn't go down to the cemetery very often. And that's about all the information I have on that. And what's interesting is we've had a lot of groups at the homestead doing investigations, and they don't really get anything about that death. They don't. But they do get information, or they pick up EVPs and stuff, or other electromagnetic, what do they call them? EMPs? What's the
EMF.
Yeah.
What's that's the electric one?
EMF,
electromagnetic field, yeah.
Yeah, so they get those when they talk about the guy that's buried in the corner without a grave, Phineas. Theodore Forster, that's his name, and he was the husband of one of Nathaniel Greene's nieces, and his uncle was the senator that built the house Mount Hygeia in Foster. Yep. Theodore Forster was the senator, was his uncle, and he was pretty much a shyster lawyer, and he's the guy that sold everything off on the property. He sold the forge off and the paper mill, and when he died, they buried him in the corner of the cemetery with no stone. And so when his name is brought up, there's activity with that, but not with the kid that was killed out there, oddly enough.
All right. So you can also kind of disprove or reassure Rhode Island like myths, so to speak.
Some, sure.
Like oh boy, what's the classic Rhode Island myth? What about what's the
Brown?
Devil's Foot Road.
Which something which something
Witch's Road in Smithfield?
Yeah, Witch's Road.
Witch's Road in every town. There's one in Johnston. They used to call Central Ave Witch's Road.
No, but you would drive with your lights off. High school kids would drive with their lights off down this one street.
Is that the one that had the tree in the middle of it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Smithfield, yeah.
I think that's
they
just
took
an
the tree down
urban
and they put
legend.
up a new tree.
Yeah, they just did. They just put up a new tree recently.
A couple of years ago, yeah.
You know, there's no... I think that's an urban legend because you can never find anybody like, oh, my cousin Vinny's next door neighbor Richie said that, Sheila said they were on Witch's Road. You know what I mean? So you never find anybody that ever actually...
Allegedly, on Witch's Road, there was that tree. There was a motorcycle driver who got into an accident, and he hit the tree face first, and his face was imprinted in the tree. I've been on that tree several times. I've never seen anything that looks like a face.
Yeah, it sounds like the myth of of Devil's Foot Road with the stone that had the woman was let out by, I think, the man who turned himself into the devil, put his foot down, imprinted the stone, took off or something.
And those marks are in that stone. I mean, you can go see it. I mean, they're there. And I think, like that probably comes from a Native American legend that probably predates other people.
Yeah, that's
know?
very true.
So, do you think a lot of stuff gets passed through its pot truth, and then it just gets
well, yeah.
all the other ingredients on it?
As a historian, all myths are based in fact. And here's the thing, with all the paranormal stuff, I am a huge skeptic with that stuff. I have people that come and I think that they're full of crap most of the time. But there are certain things, we discussed this. As a matter of fact, Buddy probably doesn't. Phil DiMaria, Phil, right?
I know Phil real well.
So
yeah.
Phil was at the
Battery
homestead tonight. He was at the homestead tonight. I was there tonight, and that came up. And and our curator, our assistant curator Josh, was there, and he's like, I'm a big skeptic, but there's stuff that goes on in this house that just, no matter how hard you try to explain it, you just can't.
Right.
And so with myths, again, and some of the stuff there's truth in it. So with the stuff that goes in our house, there's some skepticism, but some of it's based on truth. And myths are like that too. Urban legends are like that too. Or 42 different stories get combined into one, and so you ever play the game Telephone?
Yeah.
Where you whisper in the guy's ear and it goes through the room and it comes out at the end and it's completely different. Yeah. So I think that's how those are, especially when it's, Richie. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Or have you ever played My Life?
No.
The people that I talk to, how I tell them to do something simple in like a easy sentence, and then it gets passed on maybe to one kid to another kid.
Oh, that's My Life too.
They're like cleaning the kitchen, and you're like, "What are you doing in the kitchen?" Told you to clean the bathroom. Told your sister to tell you to clean the bathroom. Oh, she said something about the kitchen, and then I thought the living room. Forget about it. They don't pay attention.
I have that issue with certain organizations I belong to. I won't name them, but the communication breaks down rapidly.
Mm-hmm. You know all about that.
So all right. Here's my problem with the word skeptic. Joe, I'll speak for you on this. So skeptic. Once I think you kind of believe, or or you had some sort of evidence of something that makes you go, yeah, because we've all had that point. I think once you have that point, you're no longer a skeptic as much as like there's got to be a better term, because the minute we say skeptic, they immediately believe that you don't believe in it.
So I'd say I'm logical. So I will try to. And there's a paranormal group I work with a lot out of Massachusetts, and they're good. They're very similar. I will do everything I can to figure out the cause of whatever it was before I say that it's something supernatural.
And to that too,
there's no way to explain it.
And to that too, I mean, skeptical doesn't necessarily mean you're a non-believer. I mean, skeptical just means that you're unsure. You're not, yeah. I mean,
but
to sit there and say, "Oh, if you see something,"
but dude, the word,
you can be skeptical and still believe.
But Joe, you know this. The word in this whole paranormal world, no matter what guest we have on, the word skeptic is just it's like a strong word.
I think it's bastardized in the wrong term.
Yeah. Well, all right. I'm not saying it's fair.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to tell you like that's the history of words. There's actually history of words, and that word itself has become a word that's like.
How about this? I need convincing and proof.
Yeah.
I not even proof. I need to be able to be shown that there is no other reason why what happened what happened. And I'll give you an example. We had an event, and the EMF, right, the electromagnetic field, went off the charts, and in the dining room in the homestead, in an event at an investigation. It was an early investigation when I was dealing with Rise Up, who I really don't deal with anymore, and it went off the charts, and come to find out, right under them was the dehumidifier, and it was kicking on and off. There was a problem. It would kick on, it would kick off, it would kick on, it would kick off, and it was doing it that night. And so I know stuff goes on in the house, and people were asking questions, but because it was kicking on and off at this weird rhythm, it was spiking while they were talking. And as soon as I went downstairs and shut the dehumidifier off, everything stopped. So, I looked for the causes of that for them. So I don't know if it's a skeptic. I don't know the word you want to use, but I'm of the thought of mine that anybody that comes in, and a lot of people that come in the house and investigate our house already bring baggage with them. So sometimes they see what they want to see and make it happen. And so I'm very logical, and I don't bring anything into the house, and I'm never looking for anything in the house. And when people come in the house looking for it, they find it. So I'm not looking for it. And then when something out of the ordinary happens, I want to figure out first if it's man-made. And then if it's not man-made, like a woman talking to me and telling me my name in the house when there's nobody there, that's definitely not man-made. But the thing going on in the dining room, the kitchen downstairs, was man-made. So I want to discount any human activity or any activity that's what's the word I want?
At play.
What's that?
At play.
Right.
Well, you started the podcast off with the simple words facts. Even though that's only one word, Joe. So why would you tell me it's words? Stop with the notes. Facts. That's what you started with. Facts. And that's exactly it. Show me facts.
And I think
facts.
And I think I'm skeptical of the agenda of the people in the house that come and find things there. Maybe that's where the skepticism comes, because they're looking to find it. They've come with an expectation of finding it. When you're in a room in the dark and you're freaked out and you start to see things in the room in the dark, there's nothing there because you're freaked out. So your brain matrix right.
I think. Wait. I think he's having a regional thing though. I think it is regional skepticism. Like, in other words, I really believe this part of the country, the Northeast, we're so much more skeptical than others. Like, we're there's a lot of shiesty like people in these states in the Northeast. Oh my God, like, that's how it goes. Like, I feel like we're more skeptic than anything. Like, I'm always, man. The minute someone approaches me with a story, I always give it the first couple of minutes before I feel like I'm even at arm's length, because I don't know how to answer some of the questions. You know what I'm trying to say? You must get questions that are so bizarre. You're like,
yeah.
So I think we should coin the phrase, instead of saying, I'm a skeptic, I'm skeptical. I think it should be I'm logical, because skeptic has become just such a negative word in the paranormal field. I think I'm logical would be a better way to put it, because you can be swayed to believe, but 9 times out of 10 you're gonna go, that's a fox yelling out in the woods. That's not a lady screaming or something to that effect.
I grew up in Johnston. I grew up with guys, and I like to use the word, they're cute, not like cute to look at, but they're cute because they're slick. That was the term in my household. They're cute, and so I grew up with a lot of people that were cute. So I can see that coming. And when I can see when a mile away, I can see when somebody's got an agenda coming, or if they've got an angle coming.
I think what you're saying is you can smell the from a mile away.
Right.
Bam. Nice.
And I've been good. I've kept it clean now for 55 minutes, which is very difficult for me. Buddy could probably attest to that.
Joe, tomorrow there's going to be so many memes of you as Dr. Spock. I'm like, I was salivating at you every time you said logical. I'm like, keep saying logical, kid. I'm gonna clip that up, my friend. I can't wait to see. I just need Captain Kirk.
I got a question. I got to ask. We've been doing obviously this legit paranormal. We have been hammering on the paranormal for the last, probably solid 40 minutes, maybe half hour. But I think I could definitely speak for Mike. I think this is a question Mike's been burning to know, because I don't think he has any idea. Can you give us a little bit more information on who Nathaniel Green actually was and why he's so prevalent to the area?
I take selfies with Nathaniel Green. Please, let's talk about Nathaniel Green.
Thank you, Joe.
So how much time do we have?
Not enough, to be honest. I wanted to ask this earlier.
Talk. Just go and we'll finish.
Just talk, because I got another question. Go ahead.
So Nathaniel Green comes from there were 3 different Green families in Rhode Island. Nathaniel Green descends from a guy named the Surgeon John Green, who was one of the founders of Providence. I descend from the Surgeon John Green too. That's my non-Italian family. That's like the Verdis, right? So Nathaniel Green, his father built an iron foundry in Coventry on the Patuxent River in 1740, and then in 1770, Nathaniel Green took over as the forge master in Coventry. And the Greens owned a foundry. They owned in that at the site of the Green Homestead in Coventry. They owned a huge iron foundry. They owned a sawmill and they owned a grist mill. And they also were involved with merchant shipping out of Apponaug.
Mhm.
So he was involved, and he was a very avid reader. He read a lot of military history. He was very familiar with the classics and ancient military history and military history from around his time period. And so he ran the forge in Coventry, and they had shipping. And this circles back to the Gaspee. So they owned a ship called the Fortune, which was commanded by Rufus Green, who's Nathaniel Green's cousin. And the
Rufus
Green. It's a good name, Rufus.
Poor bastard.
Kind of like the guy from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Right.
Rufus.
So that ship was taken by the Gaspee in Narragansett Bay, carrying rum and molasses. At that time, Rhode Island had the most illegal rum stills in the country. So the triangle trade, rum and sugar and slaves, was big. So the Fortune was carrying sugar and molasses, and it was taken by the Gaspee, and they beat the hell out of Rufus Green in his cabin, which really pissed off Nathaniel Green, who was a lawyer. A lot of people don't know that, but he was a trained lawyer, and so he started to get interested in politics because the Fortune was towed to Boston in the Admiralty Court in Boston, which violated the law. The law was that the colony that your offense was in with the ship had to be tried in the Admiralty Court in that colony, and so he filed suit against the captain Duddingston and the Crown for £300, which is a pretty good sum. So. And it didn't resolve itself. As a matter of fact, during the Gaspee affair, one of the sheriffs was carrying a warrant for Duddingston's arrest on behalf of Nathaniel Green. But he wasn't, as far as we know, he wasn't involved with the actual act. But anyway, got involved in politics more and more and joined the Kentish Guards. And he was a private in the Kentish Guards. And then he, when everything happened up at Concord and Lexington, he tried to go to Boston. He was called back by the governor. And the governor created the Rhode Island Army of Observation, and Green was promoted from private in the Kentish Guards to brigadier general in command of the Rhode Island Army. Went from private to brigadier. Probably
that is one hell of an ascent, if you ask me.
Bottom to the top.
Yeah. Yep. So he brought his troops up to Boston, and he was actually in Boston before George Washington got there. And Washington was impressed with Green. He followed martial law and followed the correct the correct way they did things. So he had his tent set up correctly. He followed the book, and he had his latrine set up correctly, and he enforced corporal punishment for any of the militia guys under him with their infractions, including whipping them. And most of the other militia commanders did not do that because they were afraid if you administered corporal punishment, they would desert. And Washington was very impressed with Green when he got to Boston, and Green slowly rose through the ranks and became closer and closer to Washington, and didn't have a great record fighting at the beginning of the war. He made some mistakes, but Washington had a lot of faith in him. And so as the war progressed, Green became Washington's second in command, and Washington appointed him as his successor. So if Washington had fallen in combat, Green was to take over the army. And so they fought through New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Green is appointed. My brain's not working. The COVID fought. Quartermaster General. Thank you. And so the Continental Army marched into Valley Forge in the winter and literally left bloody footprints in the snow because they had no shoes and they were half naked. So Green reorganized the quartermaster department that was either corrupt or incompetence or both, and so he was able to feed and clothe and arm the troops so that when they left Valley Forge in the spring, they were a viable army. And so then the campaign moved through Pennsylvania, and then I'm really skimming because there's a lot of information.
That's
and
fine.
One of the Dave, I don't mean to interrupt you. One of the things that like people don't realize about. You look at American history. Valley Forge, he spent a lot of his own money to fund the troops at Valley Forge.
Well,
and then
and
crossing
that
into Delaware. George Washington's greatest feat when he was a general of the Continental Army, the American Revolution, he crossed the Delaware on these boats that were acquired by Nathaniel Greene.
Right, and Nathaniel Greene was the commander of the second contingent when they crossed the Delaware and attacked the Hessians on Christmas Eve. Greene landed about 10 miles upstream, and it was a two-pronged attack, and Washington led one point and prong, and Greene led the other. Greene was then involved with West Point. And he was put in command of West Point after Benedict Arnold tried to give West Point to the British, and he presided over Major Andre's trial. So Major Andre was the British officer that conspired with Benedict Arnold when Arnold flipped, when he switched sides, and Andre was captured, and Nathaniel Greene presided over his trial, and he was convicted of treason and ordered to be executed. And the British pleaded that he be executed as a gentleman by firing squad, and even Washington did. And Greene told Washington, no, he's a spy, and spies get hanged, and Greene hanged him instead of shooting him. So he had an agonizing death instead of a quick death. And then shortly after that, the entire war shifted to the Southern campaign, and the three previous commanders in the Southern campaign failed miserably. The last one was Gates, and Gates, I can't remember the battle it was at right now off the top of my head. You'll have to excuse me. My COVID fog. What's that?
I'm gonna Google it. It begins with a C. I'm going to Google it. I know what you mean.
It was yeah, I know it, and I can't think of it. Well, anyway, he retreats off the field, leaves 3,000 of his men to be captured. The army finally stops, and the guy retreats another 300 miles past them, and so Congress had appointed those generals, and they didn't like Nathaniel Greene, and they told Washington he could pick whoever he wanted, and Greene said, I want Greene, and Congress said, awesome, he's going to go down and fail, and we can finally get rid of him, and we'll get somebody else in there to do it. And so Greene ends up fighting through the entire South, and he fights a war of not losing. He doesn't fight the war to win, he fights to not lose. So Greene's outnumbered 10-1 in the South, and he's fighting Cornwallis in the South. You know, you guys have seen The Patriot, so Cornwallis is the main antagonist, and so Greene fights a war of opportunity and strategic retreats through the South. So, and he also splits his army, which you never do. He gives half of his army to Daniel Morgan, and Morgan fights the British at Cowpens, which is also in The Patriot, where he tricks the British cavalry into thinking that the militia is weak, and so he sends his militia out front to fire 2 shots, and then has them run away, which sucks the British in, and they inflict like 6-1 casualties on them. And that's what Greene did throughout the war. He would hit the British hard, inflict major casualties, and instead of trying to win, he'd hit them and then pull his army off the field and retreat, and then he'd hit them again and pull it off. And so he would retreat to a river, and he'd make it so the British couldn't cross the river, and he'd rest, and then the British would cross the river, and he'd hit them, and it'd inflict 6-1 or 8-1 casualties, and do it again and again, just moving north through South Carolina, North Carolina, and then eventually what's considered the greatest strategic retreat of all time, the race to the Dan River. The Dan separates North Carolina from Virginia, and so Greene is racing through North Carolina to cross the Dan River, which is wide enough that if he gets across, the British can't follow him. And Cornwallis is hot on his trail, burning his own baggage and getting rid of his food and his wagons to lighten his men to catch up. Greene has a rear guard in the camp along the bank of the river, while the rest of the army is being ferried over the river, and the rear guard are keeping all the campfires lit, making it look like there's far more troops there, and the army's still on the river. Greene gets to the camp, meets the rear guard, they cross together, and the British come in the camp like an hour or two later. So they make it across the Dan, and then Greene rests and then comes back across the river and fights the British at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, which is the battle that's kind of portrayed at the end of The Patriot. It's actually 2 different battles combined. and Cornwallis fires on his own men with his artillery, and Greene withdraws off the field. And what people don't realize is that at that time, Greene had maybe 800 to 1,000 men that were able to fight, and Cornwallis had 10,000. And Greene was convicting 6 to 8 to 1 casualties on them. So for every guy he had hit, he was hitting 6 to 8 of the British. He did it all through the South. Cornwallis is now exhausted. They fight at Battle of Utah Springs too at that time period, which is also a draw. Greene never actually wins a battle. He always leaves the British in command, but they're Pyrrhic victories. Their army is shrinking. They're exhausted. They're running out of material and supplies. So Cornwallis pulls his army off the field and retreats to Yorktown. And while they're at Yorktown, Washington and Rochambeau leave Newport. You see the signs, the W3R signs all over the state. That's the route Washington and Rochambeau take to Yorktown. They surround Yorktown. The French fleet sails and blockades Yorktown, and Cornwallis surrenders, and it's the beginning of the end of the war. Greene is not present.
Wow.
But Greene's
All
not
because of that
present.
Greene.
He's still taking out small British garrisons around the South at that time. So he's not present when Cornwallis surrenders. And then Greene comes back to Rhode Island, and he's heavily in debt because he supplied the troops out of his own pocket, and he also signed bonds, and the money disappears to pay the bonds. I can't think of the guy's name right now. And so he owes a considerable amount of money to various vendors, and including some British ones that he bought stuff from. And so he comes to Rhode Island, and he's broke, and he's given 2 plantations in the South, one in Tennessee and one in Georgia. He sells the one in Tennessee, moves the slaves from that plantation to the plantation in Georgia called Mulberry Grove. He's exhausted from the war. He's suffering from PTSD and also some unknown illnesses, maybe malaria from that time period, from being in all the swamps in the South. He also suffered from some unknown illness at the beginning of the war when he was in New York. He was in bed. Boston. He was in bed during the Battle of Bunker Hill. He was in bed during another battle in New York. Some malady that I don't know what it is. Nobody's ever pinpointed it. So he's not feeling well. He comes back to Rhode Island, gives the house in Coventry to his brother, moves the family down to Georgia, plants his first crop of rice. A hurricane comes through, wipes out a big chunk of it. Another big chunk of it burns in a barn where it's being stored, and some more is on a barge in the Savannah River, and it sinks. And the author Jed Carbone, who wrote a book about Greene, who's a
Awesome Rhode Island, right? Awesome
Rhode Island, and a reporter for the Providence Journal, he's of the opinion that the fire in the barn and the sinking on the barge were due to slaves that he owned, but there's no proof to that. But that's what his theory is, and it's possible it could have just been bad luck. So Greene's stressed out. Then he finds out that a former officer that served under him is stalking him, looking for a duel because they got into a disagreement about a horse during the war. And so Greene's really getting stressed out.
Simpler times.
And he's not able to pay his bills. He's down in Georgia. He's got his family down there. He's stressed out. He's tired. He visits a friend of his plantation. He gets heat stroke, possibly has a heart attack. They bleed him when he gets back, which makes it worse. And he goes into a coma and he dies 2 days later. He's 42, 41, 43. It's in his early 40s. His wife maintains the plantation. They had also bought property on Cumberland Island off of Georgia. She starts to date a lot of guys. She kind of gets around a bit. She was 13 years younger than him. She was 18 when they got married. And so she spoke multiple languages and was like interested in dancing. And Nathaniel Greene didn't dance. He had a severe limp. So she starts dating a bunch of different single officers. And George Washington goes and visits her and says, hey, you're kind of getting a bad rep. And so she had a tutor on the property named Phineas Miller, and she marries the tutor. And then they hire a new tutor that's also working at a neighboring plantation named Eli Whitney. And Whitney invents the cotton gin at their plantation at Mulberry Grove. And and his wife, Nathaniel Green's wife, is Catherine Littlefield Green. She was from Block Island, and she now, by historians, is given credit as one of the inventors of the cotton gin with Whitney. She apparently contributed an idea for the brush that's on the cotton gin. So it's interesting that Green is heavily involved with the American Revolution, and then at his plantation after his death, the mechanical machine that contributes heavily to the next major military conflict in America is born at their plantation. Cotton gin creates King Cotton, which increases the slave trade in the South, which is one of the factors, possibly not the only factor. State rights is a big factor, but is one of the contributing factors to the Civil War.
Question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Eli Whitney.
Yeah.
Why is Eli Whitney? Why is he at the? Oh.
So Eli Whitney was a teacher. He was a Harvard-educated teacher, and he had moved down to Georgia, and he had picked up a job of being a tutor at various wealthy rice plantations in Georgia. And so the plantations all had multiple children, and so he was there, and they were wealthy. And so
the reason I asked, honestly, Dave, is that most people don't know that he was white. Most people I talked about Eli Whitney, believe it or not, that's one of those brain fart type.
So Eli Whitney was a white guy that went to Yale.
Yeah,
he was a Yale educated teacher, and so he invented the cotton gin because before that you had to separate the cotton from the plant, and the leaves on a cotton plant are sharp. They cut your hands to ribbons, and so it's very time consuming and labor intensive to separate the puffy cotton from the plant, and it's not fun. So his plant separated the white fluffy cotton. His invention separated the white fluffy cotton from the plant, and there are cotton gins that are the size of a house now. I mean, they're massive. I mean, they still use them. It's still the machine used to separate cotton, and so it revolutionized. It started to mechanize the cotton industry, and so cotton took over rice and tobacco in the South is the prime cash crop. That's why when you read history, it's called King Cotton.
All right, I'm gonna stop us here.
All right,
Joe, you asked the question
of
who's this? How do you expect me to remember what he just said?
You gotta take better notes.
Joe, phrase your question better.
You gotta take better notes, man.
Because I mean, come on. Now I gotta be I gotta tell a story to tell who the guy is. I don't know. I'm joking.
50 Calf Street, Coventry.
Wait, was that?
50 Calf Street, Coventry, Rhode Island.
Okay.
The Nathaniel Green homestead. Go there. Learn about him.
Last question, Dave. Are you allowed to do corporal punishment in your in that group we talked about earlier on in the show?
No, but that's interesting because we had an event yesterday, and we had a guy. We did a historic timeline. We had a guy that his historic portrayal. He was a reenactor. Is a sheriff from the colonial era, and he had what are called leg stocks. So the stocks you see where the guy puts their head through and their arms through, and they're in the punishment. Well, in the colonial era, they had leg stocks. So they were boards like that, but you sat on the ground, your legs went in them, and then you had something around your neck that said thief or forger or adulterer or whatever. And people would sit in the town square for days out there sitting on the ground, and people would come by and throw their trash at them. They would throw rotten fruit at them, and cabbage was very popular. And a head of cabbage is no fun to get hit by, especially when it's rotten. And so this guy came yesterday, and it was very popular. So he had heads of iceberg lettuce instead of cabbage, and we put guys, and we took the leaves off. They ended up taking the leaves off. We had guys that sat in there with a sign that said thief, and we had kids that came that were interested to put their parents in it. So that was about the only corporal punishment we do. And it was just for show.
Wait a minute. So wait, are you saying that I could bring a certain someone there that we could lock into one of those things, and then I could throw cabbage at a certain someone? No, not anybody on this show. I'm going much deeper wounds here. So you're saying that's what I could do?
If the guy came back, sure.
Guy.
It's not corporal punishment. It's corrective action.
Damn it.
Right.
No, I was trying to think of taking the wife. See if she, just stand there for a couple seconds.
If you go on our Facebook page, there's pictures of it. They were posted yesterday.
We will.
Absolutely.
Dave, what else do you have that you'd like us to promote or just get out there into the ethos?
So the homestead kind of sits far away from everything else in the state. It's not in Providence. It's not in Newport. It's not down by the beach. So we're off the beaten path. So a lot of people don't come visit us. Come visit us. The place is our volunteers do a great job with the tour. The property is gorgeous. We have 45 acres in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's like a park. Hiking trails. We do various historical programming throughout the year. We do living history events from all different time periods. In July 23rd, we have a group that portrays medieval France coming. We have a group that portrays Romans from like 80 AD. We may have a group of Vikings come. So when Buddy was there, we focused mostly on the Revolutionary War. We've expanded our historical Civil War. We've expanded our historical programming because when you're in an area that has an audience that kind of comes to everything, if you do the same event all the time. So we have expanded historical programming that is stuff that's interesting to all different people. And all of our outside events are free now. We don't charge for it. So anybody can come if they don't have any money. That's not a problem. We just ask for a donation. So all of our history stuff outside, we make it accessible to anybody from any income level. We started doing that during the pandemic when parents were looking for stuff to bring their 6 kids to that they had no money to pay for. And so that's how we do it now.
That's good. That's a good thing. Joe, what do you got to say to wrap up, Joe?
Nothing outside of thank you for the conversation as always. And thank you for the history lesson. I have heard so much about the Nathaniel Green homestead from Buddy, all the great history, the great stories. And it pains me that I have not been there to this day, but this summer you will definitely see me there.
Oh, thank you guys for having me on and putting up with my consciousness.
That's fine. Buddy, what do you got?
I have one last question. Do we have time for one last question, Mike?
No. Well, all right, go ahead.
All right, one last question. Dave, you mentioned earlier, and this has been like kind of being in the paranormal community, you kind of hear about things like this, and you hear gossip and you hear like nonsense. Yeah. Can you just give me an answer? You mentioned earlier how you don't do business with a particular group.
Yes.
Out of Rhode Island.
Yes.
Called Rise Up. Is there any particular reason why you don't do business with these?
I like Ken a lot. Personally.
Ken's a great guy.
I do. But when they were doing events at the homestead, they were also doing events at the Payne House. And the homestead kind of played second fiddle to the Payne House. And they didn't, in my opinion, have enough staff on. But what ultimately was the problem that shut everything down is a group came in from out of state, and I happened to be there that night. Mm-hmm. And they came in, they had booked a hotel room, and they were told by someone at Rise Up, I don't know who it was, that they could go in the house without any of my staff present in the building with them.
Oh, boy.
And that they insisted that anybody that go in the house had to be a trained investigator and that my staff was not allowed in the house. And they had been assured that. And the gist of it was that it happened previously with other groups. Now, we are a National Historic Landmark. The house is full of priceless artifacts. All the stuff in the house, or 99% of it, is original 18th century stuff with some items that are connected to the Green family. And they're not under glass or in display cases. They're out on tables and in the rooms. And so we have staff in the building. And he insisted that he was told that there would be nobody in the house that was not a trained investigator. And because my staff at my museum were not trained investigators, that they were not allowed in the house, and he was assured that, and he got into a big screaming match with me and told me that he was going to file suit against us, that he came and paid for hotel rooms for his crew to be in Rhode Island for 3 days, and that it was ridiculous. And my comeback was that if you think you're going to go in a National Historic Museum without any staff in the building with you, you're out of your mind.
It's ridiculous.
I shut the program down. And we've had a few other groups come in. We had a group that came in last year that I know, that I won't say any names. And,
you don't have to.
And they were supposed to provide a donation to us. We asked for a donation to go do it.
They didn't give you one.
We don't ask for a lot. And they were interested in doing a lot of events in the house.
Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about.
And they never paid us.
I'm not surprised at all.
And so 3 years ago, we hooked up with a group out of Mass called RTS. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody in Rhode Island knows them. They did a lot of stuff with the USS Salem. And
I've heard of RTS, yep.
I met with them and we walked the property and I told them what all my rules were, and they provided a week and a half later a written proposal for their event that took into all my rules and regulations, and no other group has ever done that. And they have come and done events, and they have stuck to every rule and run the events like they own the house. And
That's
so
awesome.
so we do stuff with them. Now, we still occasionally let one or two groups come in through the, like, these guys don't have an exclusive
course.
right to it. And so once or twice a month, we'll get a request from a group asking to do an investigation. And my response is, we're open to talking to you, but you have to come visit us in person. And I never hear from them again. You have to come visit us in person, because I've had groups that showed up in person and immediately, just by talking to them, I did not want them in the house.
Of course, they're just like that wrong. They're not in it. They're just in it to promote themselves or something stupid or do something awful. I mean, I'd love to take Joe. I took Ocean State Paranormal there when Rise Up did programs there, and it was a great time. And Joe, unfortunately, wasn't a part of that.
But I will always remember the apple with the knife going through it.
All my members, yeah, we have
EVP.
I was talking with Mike Markowitz this week, and he was trying to get me the EVP of the apple being sliced in the kitchen. You could hear the knife going through the apple and
then hit the board.
It's just absolutely phenomenal. Some of the activity that exists in that property. It's not haunting. It's not negative. It's just active. It's cool. And I love to come with Ocean State Paranormal as well. But I mean, like, I'm not gonna I don't know. I do things at Barnum. I do things at East Greenwich Historical Society. We do stuff all over. It's not about the glam or whatever. Or the haunt. It's just.
I'm gonna one more thing, Mike, and I'll let you go. Honest.
No, it's not let me go. It's just that, like, when you say a quick question, and then you go on for 5 minutes, buddy. Like,
so
Joey, HR
it needed to be said. Like, I need to ask.
The other issue we had with that group that we're not naming is we have one rule on the property that we don't do any demonology in the house. I don't want anything opened up, or we don't want that. And so that was very clearly communicated to that group. And then their special guest for that event, we found out 3 days before the event, was a relatively well-known local demonologist, was their special guest for the event. And so that was a big turnoff to us, and then not getting the donation at all. That was another big turnoff.
That's a big kick in the ass. Yeah, I hear you.
So we're real selective now. We really vet groups. The house is important. We want to make sure that whatever's in it is treated well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're at. And that's all I have to say.
Joe, Dave, it's myself, who you're looking at. It's Joe. It's Charles Reese, who who that is.
Yeah, I know Charles.
And
Charles is fine.
My aunt and uncle, my aunt who's a therapist, and her husband, who whatever.
Yeah,
but
I know.
You know me. We're not going to do anything funny there.
No.
But I mean, I'd love to.
Here's Buddy leveraging his show to be like, hey.
Just a very,
buddy, anything else to wrap it up?
So to wrap it up,
I'm good. I hear my bed calling me. I hear my dinner calling me, actually.
Next week we have Jackie Harmon. She's a UFOologist and a cryptozoologist. We'll talk more about aliens and Bigfoot and all that other funny stuff. And should be a good show.
Okay. Dave, thank you so much for being here on the show. I really appreciate it. I wish you could see the notes that I took.
Thanks for having me.
I'm being honest. At times I was taking notes and writing stuff down. I'll write this down. I'll make a joke about Joey about this. But anyway, so for Dave, Buddy, Joey Paranormal, it's me, Mike, Leopard King, Mike L. This was Legit Paranormal, brought to you by LegitPodcast.com. We will see you again soon. Thank you. And we are done.